Just interested to know where you are on this scale at the bottom. Just type in the box whether what is your knowledge around trusteeship. Is it no knowledge, you just saw this webinar and thought I fancy spending 90 minutes with getting on board? Are you number 3, you've got some understanding and want to learn more? Or have you been a trustee before and this is just a refresher? If so, number 5. So Sarah, you've been a trustee before. Couple of ones coming through. And number 3, some understanding and want to learn more. Okay, so quite a few ones. Good. 5 but feels like 1. Okay, Heather, good to know. Ben, 1.2. This is the thing with working with data people. I should have used a better scale, alas. Okay, so there's a good mixture of you in there. That's the point, and really just to check that this chat function is working too. So what is a trustee? Well, a trustee is defined by the Charity Commission, which is the regulator of trustees in England and Wales. Now, I know some of you are from different countries. Largely, most countries have a charity regulator of some sort. So what I'm teaching you today will be broadly applicable, but obviously for specific rules in Germany, Luxembourg, and I think Nigeria was the other country, then you will need to look locally. But generally, this should give you a pretty decent idea. And of course, you can be a trustee of a UK charity from anywhere in the world. Trustees have overall control of a charity that are responsible for making sure it's doing what it's set up to do. A key thing that sometimes confuses people is that we use different words to describe them. We use directors, board members, governors, non-execs, committee members, etc. They are all trustees if they lead a charity. Now, every single trustee has to be registered at the Charity Commission. Typically, they are unpaid. The law doesn't allow payment for trustees in this country unless a trustee goes above and beyond their duty, like providing an accounting service. Although I would of course say that being a trustee and auditing your own accounts is probably not the best thing in terms of conflicts of interest. Generally, the size of a trustee committee is anywhere between 5 and 8 members, but each organisation has a different setup, different size, different scale. In terms of what it is you do as a trustee then, you have 6 main duties. The first is to ensure your charity is carrying out its purposes for the public benefit. The second is that it's complying with your charity's governing document and the law, although you do not need to be a legal expert for this. Generally, using your common sense and reasonable care and skill will keep you on the right side of that, which is reiterated in the red box down at the bottom, which is acting with reasonable care and skill. Thirdly, you have to act in your charity's best interests. Fourth, ensure your charity is accountable. Fifth, manage your charity's resources responsibly. And as I say, act with reasonable care and skill. Now, this is from something called the Essential Trustee. I'm going to share the link to the Essential Trustee in the chat now, should you wish to have it open to read afterwards, but you will get a copy of these slides, as I say, with all these links embedded in them. And the Essential Trustee really is a really good starting place for you as you embark on your trustee journey. Now, what are some of the examples of issues dealt with boards of trustees then that really allow you to pull these 6 into focus? Well, again, it completely changes according to what is happening in the external context of a charity. But typically, some of the things you might cover are the fundraising strategy. How do you raise the money you need to operate? What are the services that you are offering, planning those services, evaluating those services, and changing them? Clearly, as the context changes to whomever it is that accesses your services as a charity, you might need to change what you're doing. And coronavirus certainly has made charities innovate and change pretty rapidly, as has the rest of the world. In terms of finance, you might do some budgeting and reporting and keeping an eye on the cash flow, keeping an eye on the income targets and the expenditure targets. This is about holding the organisation to account around what it said it is going to be doing over the next couple of years. In terms of safeguarding, there's something in this around keeping all the vulnerable people that charities support safe. It is really the ultimate responsibility of the trustee to ensure that safeguarding is proper and due in an organisation. You might also think of emergency responses. for instance, coronavirus. And one of the bits that most trustees get to do during their time is recruit a chief executive, which is always quite an interesting thing to do. Chief executives of charities are trustee-owned appointments, so it is the trustees that recruit them. Clearly, not all of these things come up in all meetings. Depending on what's going on, you will flex your agenda according to, like I say, the external context that organisations are facing. There's something here as well around understanding that according to the skill set you bring, that might impact the amount of work you do. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. Some of the practical aspects then of being a trustee, typically, and I say typically because every organisation is different, but 4 to 8 people around a board, they meet 3 to 6 times a year, on average 2 hours a meeting, sometimes more. I'm deputy chair of an organisation called Brook Young People. We meet 4 times a year for 2 hours, and we turn over about £10 million. There are organisations that are smaller than us that meet regularly, and organisations that are bigger than us that also meet more regularly. But as a general rule, it's normally 3 to 6 times a year. You're also expected to support the charity between meetings. Often that can be something like turning up to the staff awards. It can be presenting at a fundraising event. It can be a whole variety of things, but generally charities will call on you to do bits and bobs in between the board meetings. Each meeting should have an agenda and a set of papers. If they don't, that would send a red flag to me around being a trustee of that potential charity. But the reality is most organisations in the UK charity sector are at different stages, ages and areas of growth. I think 75% of charities do not turn over more than £100,000. So the reality is most of you will go and join boards of smaller organisations. And so some of the things that I'm saying today might not apply, but actually they might be things that you can support the charity with. Minutes should record what is decided in every meeting, and every trustee's opinion has equal weight. So if you join a board and you've got a chair, a vice chair, a treasurer, etc., I'm a deputy chair of my organisation, you all have equal weight. It just so happens that the chair is first among equals. So normally we'll coordinate the debate, and sometimes we'll have a deciding vote depending on the size of your organisation. And just to say there that most organisations and boards operate collegiately. It's not really us versus them, and most decisions don't end up being voted on. There are some things that do need votes, like whether you're going to reappoint a trustee, if it's your AGM, etc. You might just pop a hand up for that. But most general board activities don't require voting. But just when you join the organisation, when you go through this and become a trustee, just remember that you have as equal weight of opinion as everybody else. Now, I'll put some numbers up on the screen here. Does anyone know what the 168,000 might refer to? I'll just give you a minute or two to pop an answer into the chat box for us. So what do you think the 168,000 might refer to when thinking about trustees in the UK? Diana, I have seen your question, and I'm going to save it for the panel because we've got 2 statisticians joining us on that panel, so they will be able to answer that question for you better. David, Martin and Ben, you have hit it on the head. Yes, it's registered charities, not quite in the UK though, in England and Wales. The reason I'm talking about England and Wales is that the same regulator, the Charity Commission, regulates charities in England and Wales. If you are up in Scotland, then you need to look for the Office of the Scottish Charity Regulator. And if you are in Northern Ireland, you need to look at the Northern Irish Charity Commission. So it's 168,000 charities in England and Wales. As I said, 75% of them have an income of less than £100,000. Total income of the sector in 2018, though, was £76 billion. So the reality is 25% of charities have most of the money and most of the economic power. You've probably used a charity service in the last year, probably without realising, because 90% of UK households have used a charitable service in the last 12 months. If you've ever gone on Citizens Advice website, that's a charity service. If you've ever looked at, I don't know, what recycling or how to recycle certain things in your housing, in your houses and in your workplace, that is probably a charity providing that advice. Most people use a charity service every year without realising. If you've been to a theatre, not so much this year, but perhaps in the 6 months prior to the pandemic, then that is a charity. Lots of libraries are registered charities. Universities, if you've ever done any work with a university, they are first and foremost registered charities too. So the interaction between the public and the charities is quite vast. Now, the 950,000 relates to the number of trustee positions. So in England and Wales, 950,000 people are trustees of 168,000 charities. Now, there is some recent research to show that actually a quarter of trustees are on the board of more than one charity. So it's about 700,000 people taking up the 950,000 seats out there. In terms of the number 2,000, that's how many trustees are appointed on average every week. And there are about 90,000 trustee vacancies at any one time. So you're joining interested in a sector that is extremely diverse, that has lots of opportunity. And if you become a trustee, you're joining, an army of almost 1 million people who are serving as trustees. So it's a really good way of volunteering your time and expertise to charities. As I say, just to articulate those numbers, 168,000 registered charities, 90,000 vacancies, 75% of charities have an income of less than 100,000. Only 6.8% of charities have 500,000 annual income, and 1.3% of charities in England and Wales earn 72% of the sector's income. Small is common, and I think it's really important that you manage your own expectations around securing a role, and also thinking about the stage of charities. Not all charities are growing. Many of them are stable and small and purposely stay that way, especially in your local community. So your village hall, your local community centre, your leisure centre, maybe another service locally, your local theatre, they are probably going to stay small and stable because they want to focus just on providing that service to their community. It's unlikely that they're going to want to grow and take over other theatres, libraries, community centres across the country. So just bear that in mind when you are looking for a role. Now, in terms of joining a charity board, some of the myths, it's always worth going through this because every time we run these workshops, aspiring trustees tell us about all the things that they've heard on the grapevine. So I'm here to dispel some of those for you. Myth number 1, trustees manage charities. That's not true. Trustees lead charities, and there is a slight nuance here. And just bear with me whilst I try and explain it, because there is a difference between staff of a charity and the executives of a charity and the non-executives and the trustees. But it is a grey area because in many organisations, trustees can also serve as volunteers. So you could easily go from this picture here in the boardroom to this picture here where you're actually doing. But in this picture, you are acting in a capacity as a volunteer, an operational volunteer. And in this one, you are acting as a trustee. There is a slight difference there in the fact that some of the decisions you might make in this room might adversely, positively, negatively affect the people in this room. Because of course, you might cut services, you might change budgeting priorities. There could be a load of raft of decisions you make in this room that impact volunteers. And it's worth remembering that you're not there in most organizations to do the nitty-gritty of actually going out there and doing it. You're there to act as a charity's best critical friend, a litmus tester for all the ideas that they have, and to provide appropriate challenge and support when necessary. Myth number 2, you will join the board of a large national charity. I'm not going to harbour the point too much because I've been through it already, but the reality is you're probably going to join something that looks a bit like this. So you might indeed join a nationally recognised organisation, but you might join their local branch. A lot of organisations are federated. So the Scouts, every single individual Scouts group in the country is a separate registered charity normally, because they have their own Scouts huts, but they are part of a network of Scouts, i.e. the Scouting Association. Mind as well, Mind have local branches, so you might join Mind Cardiff, but actually you're part of a national network, so you might join a national brand, but you'll very much be focused on local services. And for many of you, that will be, ticking all the boxes, and for others, you might want one of the big players in the sector. And just to give you a statistic on that, the Tower Hamlets Food Bank is a local registered charity, but part of the Trust network, which has 1,200 food banks in it. So it's a pretty diverse sector. anything you care about, I can guarantee there is probably a charity out there dealing with it. The charity I'm deputy chair of, Brook Young People, is not to be confused with Brook the Donkey Sanctuary. So just to show you that actually, whatever it is you're interested in, there is a great diverse sector out there. In terms of the largest 15 charities by income, this is probably a little bit out of date because it was May 2018, and obviously income this year, particularly for the universities on here, is probably changing. But there are some organisations here I bet you didn't know were charities. So Nuffield Health, most people don't think of them as a registered charity. Lloyd's Register Foundation, most people don't think of them as a charity. Often, like I say, universities are overlooked, but they are registered charities. The Charities Aid Foundation, which provides banking services and investment services to charities, is a registered charity too. So there are lots of organisations out there that you might not have known are registered charities, but these ones are atypical of the sector because they are big. The majority of charities look more like this. And some of them actually that you'll come across won't even have logos and whatnot. So as you go through your search, you'll start to see the difference in scale in the sector. You have to wait to be invited to be a trustee. Myth number 3. Well, you can actually apply for trusteeships. There is a diversity problem in the sector though, and that is partly because charities aren't great at advertising their roles, but you can find lots of volunteer trustee opportunities out there. You can also approach charities speculatively, and that's really worth remembering if you are joining a hyper-local organisation who might not have a website. They might just have the email address of the chairperson that you'd have to get in touch with, or you might quite literally have to go and knock on their door if they are a charity providing face-to-face services in the community. Sometimes not all organisations have the capacity to advertise trusteeship and to manage recruitment properly because they're smaller organisations. So really it's taking a blended approach to the two so that you don't have to wait to be asked. Charities do struggle to get the skills that they need too. So especially if data and statistics is your thing, which it is because of the background that you all have, because around sort of impact, monitoring and evaluation, that is a key area that charities struggle with. They are always trying to prove their worth and their impact and their value, which is probably something that you could absolutely help with. But you can find vacancies freely online if you wish to. Myth number 4, being a trustee takes up a lot of time. Now, the research on this varies. It's between 30 and 50 hours a year for charities, and that typically should mean all of your preparation, travel for when we're allowed to travel again to meetings, and actually participating in the meetings too. But obviously some trustees do more, some do less, and it can vary over time. Certainly over the last year, I've done a lot more with Brook than I would have potentially in normal times. And I expect as we sort of move through the pandemic, we might actually start, our time commitment might actually start dropping ever so slightly because we're getting to grips with what's going on. Now, there is other volunteering that you might do as a trustee, which is not necessarily a critical part of the trustee role. As I've said, you might go above and beyond the trustee duties and do more. In terms of the number of board meetings and timings, you'd have to, measure that in too, but broadly 30 hours a year is what we are thinking. Clearly as well, if you take an enhanced role as a treasurer, as a secretary, as a chair, you'll probably end up committing more time to it because they're more demanding roles. And equally, if you join a subcommittee, you might join the risk and finance committee, you might join the safeguarding committee, you might join the fundraising committee, then you can expect your times to increase. But I suppose it depends on how hands-on do you want to be. Many organisations these days as well provide volunteering leave. If they don't, I would certainly be pushing your organisation for that, because it's a really good thing to do. There are lots of professional benefits to being a trustee too, which I'll go through in a moment. What else could you be doing with your time? Well, we already spend 1,460 hours watching TV, 1,000 hours on the internet, 208 hours cleaning, 43 hours exercising, 43 hours getting ready for a night out. Well, we used to, of course, spend that. This is slightly dated data, but the point is here is that 30 hours a year out of what you spend the rest of your year doing isn't a huge amount of time. And as I say, the more you give, the more you get. Myth number 5, you are personally liable if things go wrong. Now, this is a well-peddled myth, but the reality is most personal liability is usually limited. You can check whether or not an organisation is incorporated by using the link at the bottom of the slide. If it's incorporated, then most liability is limited to £1 or £10. If it's not, then you have to be criminally or willfully negligent for there to be a problem with the law. And in 2016-17, there were only 186 statutory inquiry cases into charities. The reality is that the regulator doesn't investigate trustees regularly. 200 cases in 16-17 out of 168,000 registered charities. So most liability is limited. Also, remember that being a trustee, you are part of a collegiate board. It is a collaborative role, and you do have the power to bring in external expertise when needed. So if you need some legal advice, if you need some HR advice as a board, you can absolutely appoint somebody to give you that. It is within your power to spend charity cash to make sure you are fulfilling the 6 duties I spoke about earlier and acting with reasonable care and skill and seeking advice when you need it. So don't worry about this one too much. Some charities do offer trustee indemnity insurance. Have a look into that if you are interested in being a charity of an organisation that's not incorporated, because it should offer you a level of protection if anything goes wrong financially. But broadly, most charities are incorporated. And as I say, you can use that link at the bottom of that page to check. Charities should be grateful you want to be a trustee, myth number 6. Well, the reality is you get as much as you give. It's a two-way street. In terms of some of the benefits of being a trustee, then 96% of trustees say they've learned new skills, 73% say it's boosted their confidence, 84% said being a trustee made them happier, 86% say it's a good complement to professional and family life, and 38% had new leadership aspirations as a result. Just out of interest, could you just spend 30 seconds typing why you're interested in being a trustee into the chat box, please, and just share that with us so we can get a flavour of the sorts of motivations that you have. I think it's fair to declare as well whether you have a motivation to just develop your skills as well as to give back, because you can learn a lot from a charity board. I know I'm certainly better at my day job because of the trustee experience I've got. I'm 28 and I've been a trustee for 10 years. So there's no way that I'm not better at my day job because of that experience. Stephen has said time on my hands post-retirement. Heather has said desire to do something useful for society. They're great reasons. Yes, time. The average age of a trustee is 57, so there are lots of retirees on boards, which is a great thing to do. But if you are also mid-career or at the start of your career, it's also a great thing to do, and you'll hear about that a bit more in the panel later. Mervyn said, been a trustee before, but now looking for a fresh and interesting contributory challenge. Eugenie, use my skill to help out community and learn new skills not gained from my day job. Great. To give something back to society based on my 30 plus years in industry and academia. Ben said, involved with a theatre company that is thinking of charitifying, registering as a charity, but would like to use stats for something worthwhile as well. Great. Okay, so there's some really good mix of reasons there. Steve said to use my experience in other areas I'm very interested in. Great. Well, these are all very valid reasons to join boards. And as you can see, much of what you said fits into these 6 statistics here. So it's a really, like I say, good thing for you to do. Diana said, I'm retired and want to give back using statistics and psychology skills. I'm 80, do some volunteering, e.g. Age UK befriending and helping with computer clubs. I love that. I love that you're you're volunteering as well as wanting to be a trustee. There's I'm sure lots of charities out there that could use your skills in stats and psychology. It's a great way to stay engaged in your local community, to meet new friends, colleagues, etc. So some of the other skills developed through trusteeship then, 74% say it helps with self-confidence and ability to build relationships. 51% say it helps with their teamwork. 63% say communication and personal effectiveness, 67% influence in negotiating, 66% operating in different work environment, and 60% exposure to cross-sector skills. I guess there are things in the boardroom that you'll deal with that you'll never potentially get the opportunity to do in your day job. So you might deal with a merger and acquisition as a charity, you might deal with closing a charity down, you might deal with social investment as an organisation. And I say that because we have just secured social investment as an organisation, which is, you know, the new kid on the block in terms of financing charity. So there's a whole vast array of things you might be able to do that you might not get the opportunity to do in your day job. Now, again, some of the other unique benefits that come up is about experience in the charity sector in a different way. Most people have volunteered at some point in their life, but it's been quite operational volunteering. This is about stepping up into the strategy level of things and being helped to guide organisations through their strategic plan and business plan, if they have it, or through the next 5 years and all the challenges that they're facing. It's a good chance to benchmark your skills as well. It's also about well-being and being able to give back non-financially. Not everybody can afford to give to charities financially for whatever reason that's going on in their life, and so this is a really good way of giving back that doesn't have to hit your bank balance, which is always nice depending on what's going on in your life. Now, what kind of charities do you want to join as trustees? Again, just using the chat box, just put in put in the sector that you're interested in, or if specifically you've got a specific charity in mind, pop that in there too, just so I can get a flavour for it. And clearly, Ben, you're already involved in a theatre company, so that tells me that. But just let us know the sorts of organisations you're interested in, just so we can get a flavour for that from the room. Phil, not sure at the moment. Martin, maybe a hospice. Heather is interested in the youth sector. Eugenie doesn't have a preference. Stephen, educational. Sarah is already, Sarah, sorry, is already a trustee for a patient support charity. Steve, social help. A couple of you not sure. Eliminating social isolation for the elderly. Well, Cameron, it looks like you and Diana should have a chat, considering she's part of the befriending service at Age UK. Mervyn, music or science or combination. Okay, great. So great mix out there. And as I say, there are organizations out there to suit everybody. So you'll definitely be able to find ones that are in there. Something in the creative industry. Sarah McD, clearly the creative industry are crying out for support at the moment, considering they've been left on a limb by the government policy towards coronavirus. Diana has said health, cancer, community, children and foster care. Okay, so huge array, even within individuals, like Diana there saying health and then breaking it down to cancer, community, children and foster care. This is just the point really, that it's a diverse sector, but the people coming into the sector as potential trustees are also very diverse in their interest and their skill set. Now, the reality is it's about matchmaking, right? It's the importance of finding a match between what it is you care about, what the charity does, and whether your skills can contribute to what the charity needs. You don't need to agonize over doing this. It's not about thinking I will only go for organisation X, Y, and Z. But I think it's a good idea to broadly think about what areas am I interested in, because otherwise you'll end up applying for loads of roles. If you can narrow it down to sort of 2 or 3 areas in the sector you're interested in, which many of you have done in the chat there. So Marvin, when you say music or science, actually that is your shortlist then of organisations. So looking at music and science organisations and narrowing your search will help you just have a better search when you're going through this. Kunle said community, children with less privileged in schools. It's interesting to see the youth sector coming through there. I work for a youth charity, so I'm always quite interested to see how many people are interested in the youth sector. Also, don't be put off if you get rejected. If you're a first-time trustee, there is very real possibility you'll get rejected for an organisation. I'm an experienced trustee and got turned down for a role not 2 months ago. So it happens. And really, as I say, it's about finding the match for both the charity and for you. So don't be put off. I think some people, when they apply for trusteeships, think charities should be grateful I'm applying, therefore I should have gotten the role. But clearly, if your skills or experience don't match the issues the charity are facing either now or over the next 5 years, then it's perfectly reasonable for them not to appoint you. Just go for another. There's loads out there. In terms of your fit then, I guess it's worth you grabbing a pen and paper or just thinking after this webinar, what are the causes you're interested in? What size are you interested in and stage? Just pop in the chat whether you're more interested in startups or more established charities. Again, just so I can get a flavour for that and I can give you some tips depending on what it is you say. Also think about logistics, where and when. Of course, at the moment is a perfect time to be volunteering because you can do a lot of it remotely. And as a tester for trusteeship, sometimes volunteering is a good way to start because it allows you to check in with the organisation, to understand the work that they're doing, to think about whether or not you want to join the charity board and whether you want to join that charity board in particular. Heather said already on the board of an established charity. Martin, either as I can bring a fresh viewpoint to systems thinking. Stefan said interested in startup. Okay, so there are organizations out there, as I say, of all sizes and shapes, and some that are established in terms of how long they've been around, 3-4 years, but still in startup phase. So think about, I suppose, the amount of time you've got to give. If you've got less time to give, then one of the more established charities might be better for you in under current circumstances. If you've got lots of time to give, then startups tend to need more time from people, especially because they don't always have paid staff, or they have very few paid staff and rely on trustees to do more. So just think about that in terms of your time and also your interest. If you are somebody that is super entrepreneurial, super innovative, and got loads of energy, then the startup might be great. If you're super entrepreneurial, innovative, and got loads of energy but don't have enough time, then established is probably the better stage for you. Also, it's always worth thinking about things outside of the charity sector. So public sector bodies recruit non-execs as well. You might want to think about that, or you might want to be a governor of a school. The rules are broadly the same. The regulator is slightly different. Schools are regulated by Ofsted or by Estyn in Wales. I don't know what the Scottish school regulator is. Do any of you know? Stick that in the chat, because every day is a school day. But the point that I'm getting at is all of these things that I'm giving you today can be applied to any searches for a non-executive role, whether it's in the charity sector or not. So the last thing to really think about, is your time demand and availability. So it's really useful for you to think about these sort of 5 things as you go ahead. So in terms of your relevant skills, passion, knowledge, and experience, then how do you work out whether you're a good fit for the charity? Lots of you have mentioned about your 30 years careers, etc., and that's brilliant, and it's a key part of the role, clearly, but not everybody that's a trustee has actually had a career. People do other things in their life. So really, charities are looking for you to articulate what you bring from your life experience, your work experience, and that can include voluntary work as well, as it says in the box below, volunteering, fundraising, and any campaigning you've done, your skills and qualities, and your passions. It's about bringing all 6 of those into the meld of things, because clearly, depending on what you've done in your life will shape your perspectives and will shape what you can bring to a board. And I think the starting place for charities is that diverse decision making is always better decision making. And if you ask people to have had a long career in X, then that clearly rules out a lot of people. So when you're, if you don't come to the session next week and this is the only interaction that you have, then take this slide and just map out the things that you think under these 6 boxes a charity would be interested to hear about from you when you're applying, because your life experience is what drives your perspectives, drives your value, and drives your ambition for you and for the charity. So just weave those things into your application. I think it's always quite nice to take 10 minutes to just think about your life anyway, and think about those 6 kind of areas and how you would master your examples should you get to interview, because that's the other thing. If you're a bit out of experience of interviews, this is going to be a good practice for you. Some of the challenges charities face then, what do they normally ask for? Well, they ask for all of these things. So they ask for help being strategic. They ask for help with fundraising, income generation, growth and infrastructure, HR, marketing, PR, finance, legal, governance, technology, premises. And as I said, with impact, the real key area at the moment, because of the mantra that's coming from the government and indeed from the Charity Commission, is around charities proving their impact and their worth. And that requires data. Charities are not always data driven. And so there is a gap there in the skills, probably because we're lacking people like you from our boards. Having said that, there will be things you've done in your career, even though your career has been as a statistician, there'll be things that you've done in your career that can help address some of these things because of what you've done elsewhere. And of course, thinking about the breadth of roles these days. Most people don't just do their job and that's it. Most people look across the sort of organisation that they work for. So I think I've already asked you to think about the causes, size and stage, but some of you, what experiences and skills do you think you'll bring to the table? Pop that in the chat for me too, because I know that some of you have indicated this around what you've spent your career doing, but if you just take a minute to just think about what skills and experience am I bringing to the table? And whilst I do that, I am going to get our panelists ready for their talk. Okay, so there's some good answers coming through here. Eugene said data analysis, teamwork. Steve, mix of administrative and statistical experience. Heather, some degree of clear and logical thinking about issues. Martin, process improvement with data and metrics across the organisation. Phil, broad experience across UK science, academia and industry. Great. Well, for those of you that have answered, it's good to know that with very little warning, you know exactly what it is you're offering. That's really helpful to know. Cameron, data analysis, previous experience running my own business, great. Often a chief executive at a charity is the loneliest role in an organization. So if you've got experience of being in a senior management team and operating, despite as a senior manager and part of the team, in an isolated way, then chief executives find that really helpful. So make sure you include that in your applications. Stephen, working data, trustee of a pension fund. Stephen, that's a good reminder actually that lots of pension funds do require trustees too. It's slightly different in terms of being a trustee of a pension fund because the sorts of decisions you make are different, clearly, because you're talking about pensions rather than sort of service provision in terms of, I don't know, running a food bank or a food kitchen or whatever. Diana said, I'm an academic and have chaired research committees, also some people skills dealing with graduate students and supervisors. I'm pleased you said about students there, Diana, because another area of the economy that are first and foremost registered charities are actually student unions of universities. They are all registered charities. So if you've got an academic background, there is obviously a natural link there then to a student union. So do think about that too. And many of them are multi-million-pound turnover organisations. So you still get the really good bits of the charity sector, but you get this added element of higher education, which might suit some of your interests a bit more. Paula said, I've got some board experience in regulation, private, public sector, and finance. Any of you with finance skills will probably get snapped up because charities are always looking for people with finance experience, either to be accountants or to just broaden their finance skill set. It does sometimes mean that you sort of get pigeonholed to dealing only with the financial issues. So you'll need to do a bit of battling there and making sure that you sort of talk about the breadth of your experience beyond that. And so you can talk at board meeting about things other than finances. Again, just so you get the chance to sort of flex your muscles around your other skill set. Okay, Marvin has said mix of research, metrology, strategic and business planning in big pharma. So the health charities would probably be interested in you, Marvin, if you're interested in that. I know that at Brook we have partnerships with people like Bayer and AstraZeneca and whatnot. So we do get engaged with those sorts of corporate organizations. Okay, really interesting to get that background from you. I realize in this webinar you're all listening to me talk, but this is a good way to get you involved. In the class next week, if you come to that in the 90 minutes, it's going to be a mixture of how to apply for the roles, and then we're going to get you in breakout rooms to start working on applications and showing you how to use the different search functions and whatnot. Before I break for to the panelists, I want to show you how to do some basic due diligence on a charity. We will go through this in more detail next week, but I want to show you this because if you don't come to the session next week, it's a really good thing to do. Have any of you ever used the Register of Charities before? If you have, just pop in the box, yes or no. Whether or not you've used this, the Charity Commission's Register of Trustees. No, 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 no. Okay, most of you haven't. Interesting. So every charity, as you know, in England and Wales is regulated by the Charity Commission. Most charities in England and Wales that operate in Scotland are registered with both Oscar and with us, Oscar being the Office of the Scottish Charity Regulator. And this is a really good starting place when looking for charities, because you can use the search function here, press find a charity. You can either, if you know the charity name, search it, or you can do an advanced search to find organisations in your local area, depending on income or what they do. So as you will see here, you know, there are that many 12,336 registered charities that focus on accommodation and housing. So you can get to grips with the sector a little bit here. Look, 21,000 organisations that work with people of particular ethnic or racial origin. But the key thing that you'll do mainly is when you've found a charity you want to apply for, you can then search that charity on the register. So if we do a big brand charity like Save the Children, if you search Save the Children, you'll find Save the Children here. Clearly, with an income of 970 million, it is one of the biggest charities out there. If you then click the charity name, what happens is you get a baseline of information for the organisation. So it tells you what they do at the top here, tells you what their income is and what their expenditure is. So you can see the sort of scale of the organisation that you're joining. You can then see how many employees it's got, so 17,000 employees, 14 trustees and 9 volunteers. Now, the bit you're probably interested in the most is this bit as you go through your trustee journey, so that you can find what other trustees are out there. Also, it's in charity law and in regulator guidance that any employee earning over £60,000 has to be declared by Save the Children, by any organisation over 60. So the number of staff earning over 60k in Save the Children is 113. The number of staff earning 200 to 250,000 is 4. So clearly, when executive pay came up as a bit of a scandal in the charity sector, the Commission has placed a lot of focus on getting a bit more transparency on that. So you can find that information out on here. You can also have a look at the governance. So it tells you here the organisation type that it is, whether it's registered for gift aid or not. It tells you if it's got any other regulators. So for instance, at Brooke, we're a health charity, so we're regulated by the Care Quality Commission as well, because we run health services. And then you can have a look at trustees. So you can do a bit of research about who's on the board. So if you're joining an organisation, or you've found an organisation locally, like I say, a local theatre, but you can't find any information on their website, this is your default place to go to. You can find lots of information on here. And also you will notice that under this section, contact information, there will always be some contact information. Obviously, you don't know who is reading that email address, but in a smaller charity, your email is probably likely to land where you need it to if you are making a speculative approach. One of the other things you can do on here is look at their accounts historically. So I'll just show you that now. So they were 8 days late at submitting their returns in 2019, but you can go as far back as the last 5 or 6 years and download their accounts. So you can start to just build up a picture of what's going on. You can do your research before you decide whether or not you want to put in an application. Now, charities that are good at recruitment will already give you that information in their application pack, but if they don't, this is where you can get it. So as I say, every organisation is on here. The other thing that is good to do is with trustees, it tells you whether they're trustees of other things. And the reason that's helpful is because, of course, these people are likely to be on your interview panel. So there might be shared interests that sort of come up in conversation. And I find it's always helpful to know the background of trustees a little bit, so I can just sort of understand what makes them tick and perhaps understand things to avoid saying in the interview room, or just things to be cautious of. So I hope that was helpful for you. I mean, like I say, most of you, I think everyone that commented said they hadn't used that before. So yeah, the Charity Commission is a really good website to go to. And if you're ever unsure of whether a fundraising ask that comes through the post is a legitimate charity, you can search the number on here. Diane, I've just seen your comment about not having a link for next week. Do not worry, we will get it to you after this. I will also share it at the end, but I'll let a marker tell you how to book onto that in a moment from the society. So hopefully that was useful for you, just to be able to do that and to check it. And we are slightly ahead of schedule, which is very rare, but we're going to jump into the Q&A session now. Cameron has asked a question as well, which I will wait to give to the panel. So if you've got any questions that you want to ask the panel, then do start putting them in the Q&A box. If you can't find the Q&A box, put it in the chat box, and then we will deal with them accordingly. In terms of who's on our panel, we've got 3 people for you. I didn't copy their biographies fully over because I let them introduce themselves, but we've got Alison Macfarlane, Peter Lane and Ellie Harding. Alison and Ellie are still both existing trustees, and Peter used to be a chair of deaf studies. So it's always great to bring a chair onto this, because they can talk to you about what they're potentially looking for in an applicant too. And I've got some backup questions in case you guys are needing a bit more time to think about it. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to pause the recording whilst I faff around with the technology and make Alison, Peter and Ellie panelists so that they can join in with the chat. So just bear with me and take the next minute or two to just think of any questions that you have. And of course, if questions come up during the chat, I'm more than happy for you to ask them. So just 2 moments, and use this time if you need to go grab a drink, pop to the toilet, whatever. Can I now ask you to both just introduce yourselves, just spend a minute talking about your career background, your trusteeship, and what the organisation you are or were a trustee of does, please. Alison, if you start.
Right. Well, my background, the first 10 years of my career, I worked as a statistician on a huge variety of subject areas. Probably mainly because I had rather precarious jobs, and they came to an end rather quickly. And then I sort of ended up in the health area, and then particularly into research on maternity care. This is an area which there is a lot of misuse of statistics to claim X, Y, and Z. We always, things like we've got the highest infant mortality rates of any European country apart from Albania. Depends on how complete your statistics are, for example. And if your statistics are rather incomplete, you've got impressively low infant mortality rates. So there's a whole lot of sort of mindless repeating of statistics on that. The first organisation of which I was trustee, which is quite a long time ago, came in actually as an organisation which was campaigning for better maternity benefits. It wasn't about maternity care, but it was rather captured by medics, particularly who used this enthusiastic group of women to say that that we would have better maternity care if we had lots more doctors, and I won't go into the detail of that, but a bit further down the road, one of the other trustees suggested that it would be a good idea to recruit a statistical researcher to the trustees, and I've been making rather a lot of noise challenging the use of statistics, and somehow I got on board. And so particularly in that charity, my role as a trustee was the director would say in meetings, well, no, surely that must be right. I'm sure that's right. And my role was to say, well, Chris, you may well be right, but I think we need to have a look at that. So make sure that they were saying credible things about that, about making claims about what will make things better for mothers and babies. Whereas at the same time, the main role of the charity was about maternity rights and benefits, and there are other charities who focus on maternity care, and this was not what the first charity is, Maternity Alliance, and also it was an alliance. The structure of that charity was alliance of a lot of organisations which affiliated to it, and all the organisations had their own agenda, so that was quite that also was quite a challenge. It also had a very active trade union working party, and a long time recruited two new members who'd written a book, written about their experiences. And again, it was about getting rights and benefits. One was called Francis O'Grady, who you may who you know is the General Secretary of TUC, and her friend Heather Wakefield has just retired from Unison and is actually chair of the Successor Charity. So just to say, the Maternity Alliance lasted for about 25 years. It then it got into financial difficulties. Then the director, having got it back on track, decided it's time she retired. The next director was somebody who was very high profile, and I was involved in the interviewing for that, and we made a big mistake. The director was a woman called Liz Kendall, who was high profile. She was not any good at fundraising, so it started to go down the pan. Then she gave 3 weeks' notice and went back to work for her own boss, Patricia Hewitt, an MP, and then inherited her seat when she retired. So after that experience, having seen what Liz Kendall was like at running a small charity, I didn't vote for her as leader of the Labour Party. And then the last director was a Labour politician, and she hasn't got elected because she was standing in Brighton, and the constituents vote for the Green candidate. But equally, she inherited the charity when it was on the way down, so actually, as the trustees, we had the job of calling in the receivers, and as trustees, we were sort of supporting the rundown of the charity and those sort of things. So that was a bad experience.
Okay. Alison, if I can just pause you there, because talking about closing a charity is one of the things that I said earlier that trustees might do. But I want to just give Peter and Ellie the chance to.
Sorry, I've gone on for too long. Just say that I'm now trustee. About 5 years later, a new charity with the same agenda, Maternity Action, rose from the ashes and was started by one of the members of staff of the old charity. And again, I was recruited to be a trustee, and we're now having a governance review. And one of the things is about having people who are trustees for too long. And so some of the things that are being discussed about recruiting, how we recruit new trustees, and how we are more diverse, and so on. I'm sorry to go on for so long, but I was mentioning some of the things I'd had to do.
Well, and I did say 2 or 3 minutes, and you took just slightly over that, so it's fine. But Peter, can you come in and just talk about your sort of trustee journey, where you were a trustee of, what the organisation did, how long, etc.
Okay, well, my own career was been through fairly large organisations originally, with Unilever and Diageo, and I mainly worked later on in drink. And I did market research, and I did marketing. And I think, like most things in life, you end up in organizations by happenstance. And a friend of my wife was a member of the Deaf Studies Trust in part of the university. It was Deaf Studies Department at the University of Bristol. It was suddenly needed to find a different way to raise money, and so it became a charity. And then it needed to recruit trustees, and I became one originally because I was able to bring them promotional and marketing skills to enable them to get money. And I was actually stayed on for about 15 years, something like that, becoming the chairman. And you end up with, therefore, about 5 or 6, 7 meetings a year, plus other events. Now, the deafs are an interesting group because they have a world of their own and could exist entirely on their own if they wanted to, but they do need help to link up to the rest of everybody. I mean, they're fairly defensive people and very aggressive, but very lovable. And so you have to find ways to get them links to the outside world. And I helped them run a big research project, which we presented at the Market Research Society about 10 years ago, showing what their consumer requirements are and how everybody can help them with how to make their lives better. Because one of my main interests is in increasing access for people who aren't on the level playing field, as I've always been part of that myself. Having started off fairly slightly disabled, but then trying to enable people to use their skills best they can to take everybody else on, really.
Thank you.
And so just to give people a clue about life, I'm involved with the RSS in that I took part in the Statisticians for Society, because one of my main interests is music, and I'm down in Wales, so I did a project for Ensemble Cymru, which is a chamber orchestra group in Charity in North Wales, and I think I'm probably on their board as a result. I think a lot of the ways you get into things are through what you do rather than necessarily direct application, and you get absorbed. But so therefore, I think people are looking to become part of Charities. They should pick something which they have empathy, things they care about. That's absolutely vital, I think.
Thanks, Peter. And a great closing point there around, making sure the values bit matches up. So Ellie, I'm going to ask you to do the same. What is your current role? Where are you a trustee and what does the charity do? But I'm going to make it harder for you by asking you the first question which has come up, which is, why did you become a trustee? What was behind your interest?
Okay, start with the first part and then we'll pick up the other one. So I'm a trustee at Quakers in Britain, which is a faith-based charity. Quakers are a church, but I'm actually a trustee of the charity that supports the work of the church. So picking up projects. So Quakers have quite a long-standing commitment to sort of like sustainability and peace projects. And so the charity delivers those projects. And I've been a trustee for about coming up 2 years, about 18 months might be a bit too short, but that used to be my standard line. Yeah, so just under 2 years, but have been working in the charity sector. I mean, I started volunteering when I was 13. So if you want to take that as like charity sector work, 13 years, but I guess, paid for work for the last sort of 8 years, and have moved through sort of on the ground volunteering to management roles and volunteering to one of the most interesting roles I had was managing a governance team and getting involved in several governance reviews, which I think probably leads quite nicely into what were my interests in applying for trustee. So technically I didn't actually apply. We have a nominations process because we do use Quaker Business Method through our selection process, I guess. One of the things I would say is that we had to fill in these forms, and probably by ticking the governance box, that did sort of help in terms of declaring an interest. And so I ended up becoming a trustee by filling in this form saying I was happy to sort of support the charity in the work that they wanted to deliver, and the team who sort of appoint people to roles identified that I could be a trustee, and they then went and found references for me before they actually spoke to me, which is a bit of a funny way of doing it, but it is how it works for us. But I think it wasn't long shot of like I probably would have been looking for trusteeships elsewhere, and it was just a really nice way of, like, sort of, as Peter said, pulling together interests, passions, and feeling like I had a skill to offer. I am, in my real life, I'm a civil servant, but I actually come from a STEM background. I'm not a statistician by trade, but I do have a background in, so my undergraduate was neuroscience, and then I did public health and then data science. So sort of have some skills, but I am not a statistician. They're slightly different, but I do now work in sort of like evidence-based policy work. So I work alongside a lot of analysts in government.
That's also one of the questions that's come up. So as the statisticians on the call, Peter and Alison, what do you think statisticians can offer charities in your experience? And let's start the other way around, start with Peter first.
Well, there's a lot of data out there, isn't there? It all depends what charity is trying to do. If they're, you can help them find out if they're looking to target certain kinds of people, you can find out where they are through the statistics that are available. Or sometimes they want to do actions, and you can help plan them, how they measure whether what they're doing is successful. And so it's a lot, quite often, especially as charities are planning to recruit people or to get money, there's an awful lot of data out there that you can access now. And so that can be quite strong, I think.
Thank you. And Alison, anything to add to that?
Yes, I mean, I think it's an interesting question, because just we're going through a governance review, and we're sort of looking at what the core skills the charity needs, and the generic ones are sort of HR skills and finance skills. But a lot of the activities are about law, the law about maternity benefits, law, employment law, because getting made redundant in pregnancy is very common, and then also rights, particularly of marginalised people like refugees and asylum seekers. And so thinking, well, you know, after all this time, are my skills what the most wanted? The things I do is on policy documents where, again, statistical claims are being made. I can help on that. There was a question of whether the trustees had too many people who whose interests were healthcare interests rather than rights. There's me, an epidemiologist, and we have an obstetrician. And so she immediately said, I don't think I'm the right person. So I think it's not, in my case, I think less than Peter, to be sort of straightforward statistical skills, but it's more the interface between statistics and policy.
Thank you. And one of the other questions that's come up, which I'll give the generic answer for, but then I'd be interested to hear from the three of you how this applies to you. Cameron asked, what is the typical term for a trustee position? And Cameron, there's no such answer for the word, there's no such answer for typical, but best practice is 3 or 4 years, renewable once or twice. So that's a conflated way of saying that you could potentially be a trustee for 12 years, but it's 3 individual terms. That's probably best practice. There are some people who I'm sure we're about to hear, considering what Alison said about her background too, who have sort of unlimited tenure as a trustee, others that have different rules. But when I'm talking to charities, best practice would be 3 years, renewable once or twice. Ellie, how long is your term? What's the term structure like?
So my term's 3 years. That is very consistent across all of our governance structure, though. I would say that I have worked in charities where there is no tenure as well. And I've also worked in charities where there's a tenure for normal trustees, but not necessarily for like treasurers and things. So I would say that I've seen quite a diverse thing. We have a really interesting, one of the things I would say on my trustee board, which is I really like is that we have 3 years as a general trustee or a treasurer, but it's 1 year as chair. And so that kind of gets either considered as a slightly separate role, so you actually could do like 2 full terms and then do a year of chair and actually do 7 years, but they are captured slightly differently, which I think is interesting if you want to sort of retain knowledge and skills, and if you want to look at sort of your I don't know, like your future proofing.
Thank you. Alison, how long is your term, or what was the
I mean, in both cases, 3 years renewable, but it got renewed a lot of times in the first one, and now, I mean, in the second one, in maternity action, I mean, there's discussions now about also that ways that maternity action is a different, it's what's called a third tier charity. It is campaigning charity, doesn't have lots of affiliates, and the question is that if people have done a long term as a trustee, are there other sort of positions in the structure? In maternity action, we had advisor members that would be appropriate once people have done about 3 terms on the board.
And Peter, what was the story at yours?
I think we were every 4 years, but the chairmanship was an annual re-election. So,
okay.
So 4 plus 1. I think.
Okay, so one of the other questions that's come up, and we'll go backwards. I won't ask you all it though, because I want to get through some of these. So what has been the hardest thing as a trustee, Peter?
Just can't think really. Sort of probably having to let people go, you know.
Well, that's good. That means you've had a pretty pleasant experience. That's obviously encouraging to people watching this who are thinking of being.
Yes. I mean, I think it is if your money runs out on a project and people have to go. That's and you're involved with that, you know. So that's the worst bit.
Yeah, making redundancies. Sorry, I thought you meant when you originally said letting trustees go, getting rid of other trustees, but I see what you mean now. So my comment about having a pleasant experience is now redundant. But if that is always the hardest thing as a trustee, I suppose, is letting people go. Ellie,
well, especially the organisation was particularly put together to raise money to enable people to work, and sometimes you just can't renew the money. So there was a problem there.
And Ellie, just to ask the same question, but slightly slanted, of course, because you've been a trustee for almost 2 years. What has been the hardest thing you've had to contend with in those 2 years? Just to give people a flavour of what might happen in 2 years, potentially.
I think the most difficult thing, I think let's not underestimate the impact of COVID. And I don't know how many times COVID has been mentioned in this so far. So God forbid, let's not play bingo. But I think COVID has been, no one could have predicted it, and you can have all of the right risk registers, everything in place, all the right structures, and if you weren't resilient before as a charity, it will certainly have been a test, but it has been across the sector a challenge. But actually, you can't go and there's no skills that you can go and seek to how to manage a charity through a pandemic. Like as a charity board, you go and if you identify a need, you go and seek that skill. That isn't how getting through COVID has worked, I think. So we've just been utilising the resource we have and seeking expertise where we need. But so I think that's been a big challenge. But I actually also just think getting my head round the nuances of the relationship with exec teams is probably on a day-to-day, just like the subtlety of what sort of detached strategic oversight looks like.
Okay, so getting that balance between being a strategic trustee with sometimes trying not to get involved in the operations, or understanding where you need to step back or step forward. Now, Alison, based on what Ellie was just saying there about coronavirus, and Stephen's asked a question, which is, have you found you can devote sufficient time? Have you found that your time, the demands on your time, has increased in the last few months, or what, and how have you managed it?
I haven't found that. I think for two things. I mean, the sort of the worst things, obviously, for Maternity Alliance, it was the insolvency. For Maternity Action, when the charity was still very small, the director had a life-threatening illness, and there was a whole thing covering for her. I think some of the things that were put in place then, I don't think it solved the problem of the sort of complete reliance on her. Fortunately, she, I mean, obviously that she was also vulnerable to coronavirus, but the financial state was on the whole worked out in advance. I mean, it happened as they were also trying to move to a larger office. So I don't think it's increased the demands on me. I think work that had been put on had made the charity able to be more resilient and less vulnerable than other charities in the sector to coronavirus. I mean, I can think other maternity charities have had sort of larger ones have had mass redundancies and been less well placed to carry on or to survive. But I think it's been dealt with, but probably by staff rather than the trustees.
Right, and I had accidentally spoken whilst muted then, which is the first time in the last 90 minutes I've done that. But we've got about 5 more minutes left of questions. If anyone has anything that they want to throw in, do. But Peter, question to you then, similar to the one I just asked Alison. When you were a chair, can you give us an average of how much time it took in a year?
About 3 or 4 hours a month, I would have said. So, or probably 5 hours a month, something like that.
Okay, so if we go for
70 hours, something like that.
If we go for 5 hours a month, the maximum is about 60 hours.
Even a bit more possibly. Things came up every now and again, you know, so they were spontaneous. Something would come up, and I didn't keep a timesheet, but it took a fair bit of time. I think if you're a trustee, you probably say you're going to have 4 quarterly meetings, or probably 6 meetings, something like that. But if you're chairing something, then there's quite a bit more involvement. So we've got to be prepared to give it a fair bit of time, I think.
And we focused on the worst bits about being a trustee earlier. So what was the best bit for you so far in your role, Ellie?
Honestly, I just think it has been about being in a space. For me, so I would say a third of my board are working age. I'd say a third don't work, but are of working age. And I'd say a third are retired. And I think that space where we have come together quite intergenerationally, and I have been able to tap into people's skill sets in a way that I just do not get to do at work, has been invaluable. I think it has really shown me where my knowledge gaps are, and I do quite enjoy that, and it's given me some real steers about what skills I want to pick up like through the rest of my career. And I've been very lucky that my board has been very functional. I think you hear quite some horror stories of dysfunctional boards, but my board's been really amazing. And so I've sort of seen that really collaborative process and our relationship with exec. I think that's probably just been like the most fulfilling part of it. And I guess you do have to make tough decisions. Sometimes I feel like I've definitely had to make tough decisions recently, and be willing to carry them, but it's so much easier if you're all in it together.
That's great. And Alison, over your long trustee career, what's been if you could choose one standout moment other than not voting for Liz Kendall, what would it be? What would it be?
Well, our last chair at Maternity Action was the last leader of the Lib Dems while she was out of office. But no, I think seeing Maternity Action, rather than a moment, but seeing it grow up to fill the gap which had been left, but doing it in a different way. For example, Maternity Alliance had loads of leaflets that needed to be needed to be posted to people. The information available to all women, all pregnant women, a high proportion who hit the website, and then some of the specific campaigns that have been successful. The most recent one, which is charging refugees and asylum seekers for maternity care, has been going through judicial review and hasn't got there yet, despite a huge amount of support for it. But the specific, I think the combination of having information for all women, not just vulnerable women, at the same time, some of the campaigns, it's one for vulnerable women.
Great, thank you. And Peter, the standout thing or issue or activity from your trustee career, the best bit?
A couple of things. Annually, we used to have we ran a course, and so I used to give out the diplomas. That was quite nice. And the second one was we ran this project where we did market research into deaf consumers, and we presented the findings at the Market Research Society conference, and we won the presenters prize, and taking the Magnum champagne back for everybody to drink at the next committee meeting was well worthwhile.
Great. And on that note, what a great place to end the Q&A. Thank you all very much for joining us for that. And I hope that it allowed you the opportunity as delegates to sort of bring to life what being a trustee actually is, and that people from all walks of life at all stages in their career and life can be trustees. I wanted to just also, just before we close the session completely, just mention a couple of things that's been going on in the chat whilst we were talking. One is to find the event. You can go on the RSS training calendar, and you'll find the next session here, which is Becoming a Trustee, How to Join a Charity. And this session is about how you find the right fit. So how do you look for the roles, working out what you can bring to the role. So as I said, doing that piece of homework, if you are coming next week, about those 6 squares, how you find a role, and what websites to use, including Reach Volunteering, and how to apply for a trustee role. So that's going to be next week with us. Also, Amaka did put into the chat that you can actually find trustee roles on the RSS website here as well, and they are pulling that in from Reach Volunteering, and we will go through how to use Reach a bit more next week. And Reach are actually potentially joining us to show you how to create an account and how to use the search function and the application function. The reason we're asking them to do that is because then you will leave the session having created an account. So this is about getting the wheels in motion for your trustee journey. But if there are no more questions, just don't think there are, that just leads me to say once again, thank you very much for everyone for coming. I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for bearing with us as we promoted Peter, Alison, Ellie to panelists and got them then to switch on their camera and microphone. I think for 90 minutes, that was not a bad tech crisis. So thank you very much again, and you can drop off when you want. You'll get a copy of these slides and you'll get a link to this recording that you can download too.